The storm came without much warning. 1 hour the sky was gray and heavy, and the next it was dropping snow so thick a man could barely see his own hand in front of his face. The wind cut through the mountain town like something angry, rattling windows and pushing over the old wooden sign outside Grant's garage. He heard it fall but did not bother going out to fix it. Not in that weather. Grant was 39 years old and had run the garage alone for 11 years. It was a small place, just big enough for 2 vehicles and a decent workbench. The walls were covered in old tools, spare parts, and a few calendars he had never taken down. A single furnace in the corner kept the whole place warm, and it was working hard that night, ticking and groaning against the cold pressing in from outside. He was under a truck doing brake work when he first heard it. A sound, low and strange, like something heavy dragging itself across gravel. Grant slid out from under the truck and lay still for a moment, listening. The wind was loud. Maybe it was just the storm moving something around outside. He waited. Then he heard it again. Slower this time. And then a soft thud against the side door of the garage. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. He stood there for a second with his hand on the door handle, not sure why he was hesitating. He pulled it open. The cold hit him first. Sharp and immediate, filling the warm garage in seconds. Then he looked down. On the ground just outside the door was a creature. It was curled in on itself, trembling so hard its whole body shook in waves. Its scales were a deep gray-green but had gone pale at the edges, almost white, the way skin goes when blood stops moving through it properly. Its wings were folded tight against its body, but even folded Grant could see they were torn. Long ragged cuts ran along the thin membrane, the edges raw and dark with dried blood. One of its front legs was tucked under its chest at a bad angle. It was a drake. Young by the size of it. No bigger than a large dog, maybe a little longer. Its head was flat against the ground, eyes half open, the yellow in them dim and barely focused. It looked up at Grant. It did not growl. It did not snap. It just looked at him the way something looks at you when it has run completely out of options and knows it. Grant stood in the doorway for a long moment. Snow was blowing in around him. The furnace behind him ticked steadily. He bent down. The drake flinched when his hand came close, a small sharp movement that it clearly did not have the strength to follow through on. Grant kept his hand still, just resting near the creature's head, not touching. He waited. The drake's breathing was shallow and fast, little clouds of frost coming from its nostrils. "All right," Grant said quietly. "Come on then." He got his arms under the creature carefully, one arm behind its front legs and one under its hindquarters, the way you would carry something that might break. The drake made a low sound, not quite a growl, more like a warning from something that had no energy left to back the warning up. Grant did not stop. He lifted it and carried it inside and kicked the side door shut behind him with his heel. He brought it straight to the furnace. He cleared the area with his foot, pushing aside an old work bag and a coil of wire, and lowered the drake down onto the concrete as close to the furnace as he could safely manage. The creature lay where he put it, too exhausted to do anything else. Its eyes tracked him though, watching every move. Grant went to the back and grabbed every piece of canvas tarp he had. He came back and layered them over the drake slowly, talking as he did it, not saying anything important. Just words. Steady and quiet. "You picked a terrible night to be outside," he said, tucking a corner of tarp under the creature's side. "Storm rolled in fast. Should ease up by morning they said, but I don't think much of what they say." The drake did not move. But its breathing was already slowing down. Not in a bad way. In the way breathing slows when something finally stops running. Grant pulled his stool over and sat down a few feet away. He looked at the torn wings. At the pale edges of the scales. He was not a vet. He had no idea what a drake needed or what was wrong beyond the obvious. Cold. Exhaustion. Blood loss from the wings. He knew how to fix engines. He knew how to work with his hands and how to be patient with something broken until he figured out what it needed. He supposed that was going to have to be enough for tonight. The furnace clicked and hummed. Outside, the storm pushed against the walls of the garage looking for a way in. The drake's eyes had almost closed. Almost but not quite. It was still watching him through the narrow gap, the yellow dim but present. Grant leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "You came to the right door," he said. "I don't know what you've been through out there. But you're not going back into that tonight. Not while I'm sitting here." The drake's eyes closed the rest of the way. The furnace kept burning. Grant did not move from his stool. The night got colder before it got better. Grant could hear the storm outside doing its worst, pushing hard against the garage walls, finding every small gap and whistling through it. The old building creaked and groaned but held. It always held. 11 years and it had never let him down yet. He stayed on his stool. The drake slept or something close to sleep. Its breathing had steadied out after the first hour, no longer that fast shallow flutter that had worried Grant when he first brought it in. Now it was slower. Deeper. The chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt more like rest than struggle. But it was not a peaceful sleep. Every so often the creature would twitch. A leg would jerk. The torn wings would shift under the canvas tarp and the drake would make a low sound, something between a whimper and a growl, and then go still again. Grant watched each time it happened. He did not touch it. He had learned early with frightened animals that touching during a bad moment made things worse, not better. So he just sat and watched and waited for the sound to pass. Around midnight he got up slowly and went to his small back room where he kept a kettle and a jar of instant coffee. He made himself a cup and came back and sat down again. The drake's eyes opened when he returned, just a crack, tracking him across the garage floor. Then they closed again when he settled back onto his stool. It was watching him even in sleep. Some part of it was always watching. Grant drank his coffee and thought about that. He had seen hurt animals before. Stray dogs that had been kicked too many times. A cat once that someone had left in a box outside the garage in February. They all had that same look. That mixture of desperate need and deep fear sitting right next to each other, pulling the creature in two directions at once. Come closer. Stay away. Help me. Don't touch me. The drake had that look worse than anything he had seen before. Whatever had happened to it out there in the mountains had not been small. The torn wings were not from one fall. The cuts were in too many places, running at different angles. Something had happened over time, or several things had happened one after another. And it had still dragged itself down the mountain and through the storm and all the way to his side door. Grant looked at it for a long time. "You must have been going for a while," he said quietly. He was not expecting an answer. He just found that talking helped, both for the creature and for himself. To end up here looking like that. That's not a one-night thing. The drake's ear moved. Just slightly. The small curved ridge along the side of its head tilted toward his voice. So it was listening. Grant kept talking. He told it about the truck he had been working on when the storm started. He told it about the sign outside that had fallen over and how he had been meaning to replace the post for 2 years. He talked about the mountain winters and how the first bad storm always came earlier than anyone expected and how everyone in town was always surprised even though it happened every single year. He talked about nothing important. But his voice was steady and low and it filled the garage the way the warmth from the furnace filled it. Evenly. Without pressure. Somewhere around 2 in the morning the drake shifted. Not in the twitching frightened way it had been moving before. A deliberate shift, slow and careful, turning its head so that it was facing more toward Grant than away from him. It resettled and went still. Grant noticed. He did not say anything about it. He just kept talking. By 3 the coffee was long gone and his back was aching from the stool, but he did not get up to find a better seat. He did not want to move more than he had to. The drake's breathing was even now. The pale edges of its scales had pulled back a little, the gray-green coming through stronger. The furnace was doing its job. Grant leaned forward and looked at the wings under the tarp. He could not do much about them tonight. He had basic first aid supplies in the back room, the humankind, and he was not sure how much of that applied to a drake. Tomorrow he would figure it out. He would make some calls. Find someone who knew something. Tonight the job was just this. Just keeping the furnace burning and staying in the room. Around 4 in the morning the storm outside began to lose some of its anger. The wind dropped from a howl to a push. The creaking of the walls eased. The whistling through the gaps went quiet. It was not over, but the worst of it had passed. Grant looked at the sky through the small high window at the back of the garage. Still dark. Dawn was still an hour or more away. He looked back at the drake. Its eyes were open. Fully open this time. The yellow in them was brighter than it had been when he first brought it in. It was looking directly at him. Not with fear. Not exactly with trust either. Something in between. Something that was trying to decide. Grant held its gaze. "I know you don't know me," he said. "And I know you've got no reason to believe anything I say." He paused. "But you're not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not back out into that." The drake held his gaze for a long moment. Then it lowered its head back down onto the canvas tarp slowly and closed its eyes. Grant sat back on his stool. Outside the storm kept fading. The furnace kept burning. Grant did not sleep. He had meant to. Around 5 in the morning he had leaned back against the wall behind his stool and closed his eyes, just for a little while. But every time he started to drift off something pulled him back. A sound from the drake. A shift in its breathing. The furnace clicking differently. He gave up on sleep somewhere around 6 and just sat with his eyes open, watching the light change through the high back window as morning crept in slow and gray. The storm had stopped some time before dawn. The garage was quiet now except for the furnace and the occasional drip of melting snow from the roof edge outside. Grant stretched his back carefully, wincing at the stiffness that had settled in deep from a night on a wooden stool, and looked at the drake. The drake was already looking at him. Its eyes were open and sharp and fully focused in a way they had not been the night before. The dim yellow was gone. The eyes were bright now, a clear deep amber in the morning light, and they were watching Grant with an attention that was almost uncomfortable. Like being studied by something that was very carefully making up its mind about you. Grant raised one hand slowly in a small greeting. The drake did not move. Just watched. "Morning," Grant said. He got up carefully, moving slow and steady, and went to the back room. He had to call in. He had one job scheduled for the day, a radiator flush for a regular customer named Pete, and he was not going to make it. He picked up his phone and sent a short message explaining there was a situation and he would reschedule. Pete was a patient man. He would understand. Then Grant stood in his back room and looked at what he had. He had half a loaf of bread. Some leftover chicken in a container from 2 days ago. A tin of sardines he had bought and never opened. Some crackers and a block of hard cheese. He had no idea what a young drake ate. He knew the adults in the high mountains hunted. Deer mostly. Sometimes elk. But this one was young and hurt and he was not about to go drag a deer into his garage. He started simple. He put the cold chicken on an old metal tray and carried it out slowly. The drake tracked every step he took. Grant crouched down a few feet away and slid the tray across the floor toward it, then leaned back and waited. The drake looked at the tray. Then at Grant. Then at the tray again. It took almost 10 minutes before it stretched its neck forward and sniffed at the chicken. Another few minutes before it ate. It ate carefully at first, small cautious bites, as if it expected the food to be taken away. Then hunger took over and it finished everything on the tray quickly and sat back and looked at Grant again. Grant went and got the sardines. Those went faster. He tried the bread after that, but the drake sniffed it once and turned its head away with a very clear and specific kind of disdain that made Grant almost smile. He put the bread away and made a mental note. No bread. Meat only, it seemed. After eating, the drake was more alert than ever. It shifted under the canvas tarps and stretched its front legs out slowly, testing them. It looked at its own wings with a kind of focused, unhappy attention, the way someone looks at an injury they already know about but are assessing again in the daylight. The torn membranes had dried overnight. They were not bleeding. That was something. Grant got his basic first aid kit from the back room. He sat down on the floor a few feet from the drake, opened the kit, and began laying things out on the concrete beside him. Gauze. Clean cloths. A bottle of saline wash. He was not sure how much of this would help a drake specifically, but clean was clean and he knew enough to know that torn membranes left dirty were going to cause problems. He moved closer by a few inches. The drake went stiff. Grant stopped. Sat still. Counted to 30 in his head. The drake's muscles slowly relaxed. He moved another few inches. The drake flinched but did not pull away. Grant reached the wings and worked slowly, cleaning the cuts with the saline and gentle pressure, talking the whole time. Telling the drake what he was doing before he did it. Not because he was sure it understood the words, but because the steady sound of a calm voice was doing something. He could see it in the way the creature's breathing stayed even when his hands got close to the damaged areas. It still flinched. Every time he touched a sore spot it pulled back slightly. But it did not snap. It did not try to move away. It held still and let him work, and that was more trust than Grant had expected from it by this point. When he finished and sat back, the drake turned its head and looked at its own wings for a moment. Then it looked at Grant. It held that look for a long time. Then it did something Grant had not expected. It stood up on all four legs, slowly and carefully, favoring the front leg that had been tucked badly the night before, and walked 2 steps closer to him. It lowered itself back down to the floor right there, close enough that Grant could have reached out and touched it without stretching. It curled up and closed its eyes. Grant sat very still. Outside the snow was bright and silent. The furnace clicked on again behind them. Grant did not move from his spot on the floor for a very long time. It was the neighbor who started it all. Her name was Edna and she was 71 years old and had lived in the house directly across the road from Grant's garage for more than 30 years. She was not a nosy woman by nature, but she was an observant one, and when she had looked out of her kitchen window that morning to check on the snow, she had seen something through the small side window of the garage that had made her put down her tea and look again. She had seen Grant sitting on the floor. And she had seen what was sitting beside him. Edna was not the sort of person who panicked. She thought about it for most of the morning, watching the garage from her window while she went about her routine. She saw no smoke. She heard no sounds of trouble. But by early afternoon she had decided that whatever was in that garage was not a normal thing and that someone with more knowledge than her needed to know about it. She made a phone call. By 2 in the afternoon a single vehicle pulled up outside the garage. A man in a green uniform got out. Local wildlife officer. His name was printed on the chest pocket of his jacket, but Grant did not bother reading it. He heard the knock on the main garage door and opened it and looked at the uniform and felt something tighten in his chest. "Mr. Grant?" the officer said. "Just Grant," he said. "We had a report of an unusual animal on your property. Mind if I take a look?" Grant looked at him for a moment. "What kind of report?" "A drake, they're saying." The officer said it carefully, like he was not entirely sure he believed it himself. "Young one." Grant said nothing for a second. Then he stepped aside and let the man in. The officer stepped into the garage and stopped. The drake was near the furnace, awake and watching the door. When the stranger walked in, its whole body went still in the way a wild thing goes still when it has spotted something it has not decided about yet. Low and tense and completely focused, the officer stared. Whatever he had been expecting, it was clearly not this. "How long has it been here?" he said quietly. "Since last night," Grant said. "Came in out of the storm. Wings are torn." It was half frozen. The officer nodded slowly without taking his eyes off the drake. He reached for the radio on his shoulder and Grant heard him call it in. He used words like confirmed sighting and young specimen and possible containment need, and Grant did not like any of those words. The officer stayed calm and professional and did not try to approach the drake, which Grant appreciated. But by 3 o'clock there were 2 more vehicles outside. A woman in a dark jacket got out of the first one carrying a bag and a folder of papers. A man in a gray uniform got out of the second carrying a crate that was clearly meant for transporting something. Grant saw the crate and walked to his garage doorway and stood in it. The woman approached first. She introduced herself as a researcher from a regional wildlife and creature study office. She had a calm and organized way of speaking that told Grant she was used to being listened to. "We appreciate you keeping the animal safe overnight," she said. "We can take it from here. We have a facility that's equipped to—" "No," Grant said. She stopped. "It came here," Grant said. "It came to this door. Not a facility. Not a study office. This door." He kept his voice level. He was not angry. He was just clear. "It was hurt and it needed help and it came here. I'm not sending it somewhere in a crate." The researcher looked at him with the patient expression of someone who dealt with difficult situations regularly. "Mr. Grant, a drake of this age outside its natural range is a significant find. There are protocols. There are people qualified to—" "It let me clean its wings this morning," Grant said. "Did your protocols do that?" She paused. "It's been through enough," Grant said. "It doesn't need a crate. It needs to be left alone to recover." The man with the crate had moved closer to the garage door and the drake had seen him. Grant could hear it behind him, the low sound it made when something felt wrong, a deep rumble that was not quite a growl but was close to one. The man with the crate stopped moving. Then there were footsteps behind Grant. Slow and careful ones. He felt the presence before he saw it. The drake had walked up from the furnace and come to stand beside him in the doorway. It moved to his left side and stopped there, its shoulder level with Grant's hip, and looked out at the people and the vehicles and the crate. Nobody spoke. The researcher looked at the drake standing next to Grant. She looked at the way it stood there, not cowering behind him, not aggressive, just present. Beside him. Like it had chosen to be there. Her expression changed. The man with the crate took a quiet step back. The wildlife officer stood very still with his radio halfway to his shoulder and did not finish the motion. Grant did not say anything else. He did not need to. The drake beside him was saying it better than any words could. The researcher looked at Grant. Then at the drake. Then back at Grant. She closed her folder. "Can we talk?" she said. Her voice was different now. Quieter. Less organized. Grant looked down at the drake beside him. "Yeah," he said. "We can talk." The talking took most of the afternoon. The researcher's name was Carol and she was thorough. Grant would give her that. She sat on a plastic chair he dragged out from the back room and she went through everything carefully, asking questions in a methodical way and writing the answers in her folder. How the drake had arrived. What condition it was in. What he had fed it. What he had done for the wings. She asked the same things in slightly different ways a few times, the way people do when they are checking whether your story changes. His did not change. Because it was not a story. The drake sat near the furnace the whole time. It watched Carol with the same steady attention it gave everything, That calm, focused look that never quite became comfortable but never became threatening either. Carol glanced at it often. Not with the clinical detachment Grant had expected from someone in her position. With something closer to disbelief. Like she kept needing to confirm to herself that what she was seeing was actually happening. The wildlife officer stood near the door and said very little. The man with the crate had put it back in his vehicle after the first 10 minutes and had not brought it up again. Carol's main concerns came down to three things. The safety of people in the area. The welfare of the Drake itself. And documentation, which seemed to matter to her almost as much as the other two combined. Grant listened to each concern and addressed them one at a time without raising his voice or making promises he could not keep. He told her the Drake had shown no aggression toward him at any point. He told her he was willing to have the wings looked at by someone qualified. He told her he would allow reasonable check visits as long as they were calm and unannounced visits did not involve crates. Carol wrote everything down. They went back and forth for a while on the check visit question. Carol wanted scheduled visits. Grant said scheduled visits would just mean the Drake would be stressed in advance every time and that helped nobody. Carol thought about that longer than Grant expected her to. Then she wrote something down and moved on. By 5 o'clock they had an agreement. Grant would remain the Drake's primary guardian. A qualified creature vet would come within the week to properly assess the wings and overall health. Carol's office would have access for monthly observation visits, conducted calmly and without equipment that might cause distress. Grant would contact them immediately if the Drake's condition changed in any concerning way. Carol read the agreed points back from her notes and Grant confirmed each one. Then she closed her folder and looked at the Drake for a long moment. "I have to tell you something," she said. She was not speaking in her official voice anymore. It was quieter than that. More honest. "I have been working with rare creatures for 14 years. Drake specifically for the last 6. Grant waited. "I have never seen one do that," she said. "What it did in the doorway. Coming to stand beside you like that." She paused. "Wild drakes do not do that. Not with humans. Not unless there is a bond that has developed over a very long time, and even then it is rare." She looked at Grant. "You had this animal for less than 24 hours. Grant looked over at the Drake by the furnace. "It came to my door," he said simply. "I didn't turn it away." Carol looked like she wanted to write that down too but did not. She stood and collected her things and shook Grant's hand. The wildlife officer nodded at him on the way out. The man who had brought the crate did not make eye contact, but that was fine. Grant closed the main garage door after them and listened to the vehicles pull away one by one until the road outside was quiet again. He stood in the middle of the garage for a moment. The Drake was watching him from its spot near the furnace. Grant exhaled slowly. His shoulders came down from somewhere near his ears where they had apparently been sitting for the last 3 hours without him noticing. He rolled his neck once and winced at the sound it made. "All right," he said to no one in particular. He walked to his workbench. The truck with the brake job was still sitting where he had left it the night before, patient as ever, waiting for him to get back to it. Grant pulled on his work gloves and picked up where he had stopped and got back to it. The familiar sound settled around him. Metal on metal. The quiet hiss of the airline. The small organized world of a problem that had clear steps and a clear solution. He heard movement behind him after a while. He did not turn around. He just listened as the careful slow footsteps crossed the garage floor. They stopped just behind and to the left of him. Then there was the soft sound of something large and warm lowering itself to the floor. Grant glanced to his left. The Drake had moved from the furnace and was now curled up on the floor directly beside the workbench. Its chin was resting on its front legs. Its eyes were half closed. It was not asleep. It was just settled. The way something settles when it has decided that a place is safe and it does not need to be ready to leave anymore. Grant looked at it for a moment. Then he turned back to the truck and kept working. The furnace clicked on behind them both. The snow outside had gone soft in the late afternoon, sliding off the garage roof in slow heavy sheets. The mountain town was quiet the way it only gets quiet after a storm has fully passed and everything has been washed clean. Inside the garage a mechanic worked. And beside him a young Drake rested. And that was enough.